In the darkest corner of the Andromeda Spiral, where three dying suns cast their final light across a battlefield soaked in alien blood, the Caltharian High Council made a decision that would echo through the cosmos for millennia. They had fought the Void Swarm for 7 cycles, watching their greatest warriors fall like autumn leaves before an unstoppable plague of hunger. Their most advanced weapons had failed. Their allies had abandoned them. Their gods had gone silent. But there was one species they had never called upon, a young, primitive race from a backwater system called Sol. The humans had only just achieved faster-than-light travel, had barely begun to explore their local cluster. The Council's military advisors called it desperation. Their scientists called it madness. They called anyway. What emerged from the smoke and fire of that first human dropship wasn't what the galaxy expected. It wasn't the polished precision of the Altarian Guard or the noble sacrifice of the vegan paladins. It was something far more terrifying to those who would harm the innocent. It was Terran Marines, and they had come to finish a fight that should have ended before it began. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had clawed their way from the bottom of their food chain to the top, and why the only thing more dangerous than a human with nothing to lose was a human with something to protect. The emergency session of the Caltharian High Council convened in the shadow of their homeworld's 3 moons, each one scarred by recent orbital bombardments. High Counselor Zethvar stood before the holographic display showing their latest casualty reports, his usually pristine silver carapace dulled with exhaustion and despair. The numbers glowed in harsh red characters that seemed to mock their previous confidence. 7,400,000,000 dead in the past cycle alone, he announced to the assembled representatives. His voice carried the weight of worlds. The Void Swarm has consumed the Outer Rim colonies completely. Thessarian Prime fell yesterday. The survivors speak of creatures that devour not just flesh, but the very essence of life itself. Council member Ythera, her normally melodious voice cracking with grief, spoke from her position near the tactical display. Our fleet strength is down to 37%. The Hegemony Navy has withdrawn to protect their core worlds. The Altarian Guard claims they need time to regroup, but their transmission suggests they're preparing to abandon this entire sector. The hologram flickered, showing the advancing wave of Void Swarm ships, dark, organic vessels that seemed to absorb light itself. Each pulsed with an alien malevolence that made even the recording equipment struggle to maintain focus. They moved across star systems like a plague, leaving behind dead worlds stripped of all life. "What are the vegan paladins?" asked another counselor, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "The Order of the Sacred Flame made their last stand at the Corvin Gate," Zethvar replied grimly. "They managed to destroy 3 swarm biocruisers before the gate itself was consumed. High Paladin Morthak transmitted their final blessing before his ship was overwhelmed. The gate's destruction has opened a direct path to our inner colonies." The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the life support systems and the distant rumble of defense platforms being hastily constructed in orbit. Each counselor understood what those words meant. The Corvin Gate had stood for 8,000 years, a monument to Caltharian engineering and the gateway that had connected their civilization to half the known galaxy. Its destruction was not just a tactical loss. It was the death of hope itself. Defense Minister Kralnex leaned forward, his scarred face bearing testimony to decades of warfare. "The swarm's advance patterns suggest they'll reach the Caltharian home system within 2 cycles. Our remaining fleet elements are spread too thin to mount an effective defense. Every simulation we've run ends the same way." He gestured to the hologram, which shifted to show probability charts painted in shades of red and black. Total system consumption within 72 hours of their arrival. "There must be alternatives," insisted Counselor Vexini, her young voice carrying more hope than logic. "The Crystalline Collective has technologies we've barely begun to understand. Perhaps if we offered them territorial concessions." "The Collective's homeworld was devoured 6 cycles ago," Zethvar interrupted gently. Their crystal cities, which had stood since the dawn of galactic civilization, were reduced to cosmic dust in a matter of hours. The few survivors speak of swarm creatures that can somehow digest pure energy and mineral matrices. Nothing we know of can survive their hunger. The truth of their situation settled over the chamber like a shroud. The Caltharian Republic, which had thrived for over 12 millennia, which had helped establish the Galactic Concordat and maintain peace across 14 sectors, was going to die. Their children would never see their 15th birthday. Their art, their literature, their accumulated wisdom of ages, all would be consumed by an enemy that viewed sentient life as nothing more than fuel. "There is one possibility we haven't explored," said a quiet voice from the back of the chamber. All heads turned toward Intelligence Director Silmeth, whose role normally kept her in the shadows. She was smaller than the other counselors, her features bearing the modifications that allowed her to interface directly with their quantum communication networks. Her eyes held a strange mixture of desperation and calculation. "Director?" Setvar prompted. Silmeth activated her personal hologram projector, displaying a star chart of a relatively empty region of space. Sol System, in the Orion Arm, third planet, designation Earth. The species calls themselves humans. They achieved faster-than-light capability approximately 8 of their years ago. Several counselors exchanged glances. Contact with pre-spaceflight civilizations was strictly forbidden under Concordat law, but civilizations that had just achieved FTL were considered barely worthy of notice. "Director, with respect," Kralnex said carefully, "what possible assistance could such a primitive species provide? Our intelligence reports indicate they've barely established colonies beyond their own system. Their technology is millennia behind even our most basic systems." Silmeth's expression remained unchanged. "Our intelligence reports also indicate several unusual characteristics about this species that don't fit standard evolutionary patterns. They originated on what their databases classify as a death world, a planet with an unusually high concentration of apex predators, extreme environmental variations, and frequent mass extinction events." She manipulated the hologram, showing images of Earth that the intelligence networks had gathered. Vast oceans under violent storm systems, mountain ranges that dwarfed anything on civilized worlds, and forests that teemed with creatures designed purely for killing. Most sentient species evolve on stable worlds where cooperation and intelligence provide advantages over physical prowess, she continued. Humans evolved in an environment where everything was trying to kill them. Their entire civilization is built on the concept of survival against impossible odds. Counselor Yithera leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "But, Director, primitive aggression hardly seems relevant against an enemy that has defeated our most advanced military technologies." "I'm not talking about primitive aggression," Silmeth replied, her tone growing more intense. "I'm talking about something we've never encountered in any other species. Humans don't just fight to survive. They seem to find ways to win fights they should lose. Their historical records are filled with examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through tactics that our military computers classify as impossible." She brought up text files showing human military history. At a location called Thermopylae, 300 warriors held off an army of hundreds of thousands. At Rourke's Drift, 139 soldiers successfully defended against 4,000 attackers. During what they call World War II, a single human pilot named Hans-Ulrich Rudel destroyed over 500 armored vehicles, 1 battleship, 1 cruiser, and 1 destroyer, while flying a primitive aircraft that should have been torn apart by defensive fire. The counselors stared at the records in disbelief. Such tactical outcomes were mathematically improbable to the point of impossibility. "But," Director Zethvar said slowly, "these are historical records from before they achieved spaceflight. How does this translate to modern warfare against an enemy like the Void Swarm?" Silmeth's eyes brightened with something that might have been anticipation. "Because they haven't stopped evolving their warfare methods. Our latest intelligence intercepts show that human military doctrine has adapted to space combat with the same innovative brutality they've always demonstrated. They've weaponized everything from asteroid mining equipment to cargo containers. Their soldiers are trained not just to fight, but to improvise, adapt, and overcome using whatever resources are available. She paused, letting the information sink in before delivering her final argument. More importantly, every psychological profile we've developed indicates that humans have one trait that our allies seem to lack when facing the Void Swarm. They become more dangerous when backed into a corner. When other species retreat or surrender in the face of overwhelming odds, humans seem to interpret it as a challenge. Defense Minister Kralnex studied the human tactical records with professional interest. Their casualty ratios are remarkably low for such aggressive tactics. How do they manage to maintain unit cohesion when employing strategies that border on suicidal? That's perhaps the most interesting aspect, Silmeth replied. Human military units display an almost supernatural level of loyalty to each other. They will risk death to save comrades they've only known for days. Their concept of leaving no one behind isn't just a motto. It's a fundamental organizing principle that overrides even basic survival instincts. The chamber fell quiet as the counselors absorbed this information. The idea of contacting such a primitive species for military assistance would have been laughable under normal circumstances. But these were far from normal circumstances. What exactly are you proposing, Director? Zethvar asked finally. We offer them a deal, she said simply. We provide them with access to our technology, our star charts, our accumulated knowledge. In exchange, they help us fight the Void Swarm. We have nothing left to lose, and if these humans are half as effective as their history suggests, we might have everything to gain. Counselor Vexani raised an obvious objection. But what makes you think they would agree to fight in a war that isn't theirs? They have no stake in our conflict. Silmeth smiled for the first time in the meeting, an expression that somehow managed to be both hopeful and terrifying. Because we're going to tell them the truth, that the Void Swarm doesn't stop, that if they consume our region of the galaxy, they'll eventually reach human space. And then we're going to show them recordings of what happens to civilian populations when the swarm arrives. She activated another hologram, showing scenes from the Thessarian evacuation. The images were horrific, families torn apart, children crying for parents who would never answer, entire cities dissolved into organic matter that fed the swarm's endless hunger. From everything our intelligence networks have gathered about human psychology, she continued quietly, they have a particularly strong response to threats against non-combatants. The concept they call protecting the innocent appears to be hardwired into their cultural DNA. The chamber erupted in discussion as counselors debated the proposal. Some argued it was beneath their dignity to request aid from such a young species. Others worried about the implications of giving advanced technology to a civilization they barely understood. But as the arguments continued, one fact became increasingly clear: they were out of options. High Counselor Zethvar finally called for silence. The vote is simple, he announced. Do we contact the humans and request their assistance, or do we face the Void Swarm with our current resources and accept the inevitable outcome? The vote was closer than many expected, but pragmatism ultimately prevailed over pride. By a margin of 7-5, the Caltharian High Council authorized first contact with humanity. As the session ended and counselors filed out to prepare for what might be their civilization's final gamble, Silmeth remained behind, staring at the human tactical records. She had not shared everything with the council, had not mentioned the psychological profiles that suggested humans were capable of a type of warfare that other species found difficult to comprehend. The file spoke of human soldiers who fought with a fury that seemed to transcend mere survival instinct. They described tactical innovations born from desperation that had somehow become standard doctrine. Most disturbing of all, they documented a species that seemed to view hopeless situations not as defeats to be accepted, but as problems to be solved through application of superior violence. As she prepared the communication array to send humanity's first official contact from galactic civilization, one phrase from the human files kept echoing in her mind. The more you make us bleed, the more we want to fight. The Void Swarm had never encountered anything like that before. Neither had anyone else in the galaxy. 3 days later, the message reached Earth's orbital communication stations. It was simple, direct, and desperate. We are dying. Our enemies cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with, cannot be stopped by any conventional means. We offer you the stars in exchange for your help. Will you answer? The response came back within hours, transmitted on every frequency the humans could manage. It was even simpler than the request, consisting of only 2 words that would echo across the galaxy and strike fear into the hearts of those who heard them. On our way. The Terran fleet materialized at the edge of the Caltharian home system exactly 73 hours after receiving the distress call. To the alien observers monitoring their sensors, the human arrival was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Instead of the graceful emergence from hyperspace that characterized most civilized vessels, the human ships seemed to tear through reality itself, leaving jagged wounds in space-time that sparked with exotic energy. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the TNS Indomitable, studying the tactical displays with the cold efficiency that had earned her command of the Terran Expeditionary Force. At 52, she was young by galactic standards, but ancient by human military tradition, having earned her rank through actual combat rather than political maneuvering. Her uniform bore scars from personal battles, and her eyes held the particular hardness that came from making decisions that saved millions by sacrificing thousands. Status report, Commander. She ordered without turning from the holographic battle space that showed their new area of operations. Commander Marcus Webb, her tactical officer, managed to keep his voice professional despite the magnitude of what they were seeing. Ma'am, we've successfully translated 37 ships of the line, including 6 assault carriers and 14 support vessels. The Caltharian fleet is significantly smaller than advertised. Chin finally turned to examine the local forces. What she saw confirmed their worst fears. The proud Caltharian fleet, which according to their databases should have numbered in the thousands of ships, had been reduced to fewer than 200 vessels. Many of those showed signs of hasty repair work and battle damage that hadn't been properly addressed. "Get me a direct communication channel to the Caltharian flagship," she ordered, "and have Colonel Morrison report to the bridge. If we're going to do this, he needs to understand what we're walking into." Colonel James Morrison arrived within minutes, his massive frame filling the bridge's entrance. At 6 feet 4 inches and 240 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, Morrison represented everything terrifying about human warriors. His face looked like it had been carved from stone by someone with anger management issues, and his presence made even seasoned Navy personnel uncomfortable. Behind him came Master Sergeant Rodriguez, whose smaller stature somehow managed to radiate even more menace than his commanding officer. "Admiral," Morrison said in a voice that sounded like grinding metal, "my Marines are ready for deployment. Just tell us where you want the bodies stacked." Before Chun could respond, the communication array crackled to life. A holographic image materialized showing High Counselor Zethvar, whose elegant features couldn't hide his exhaustion and desperate hope. "Admiral Chun," the Caltharian leader began, his translator rendering his words in accented English. "We cannot express our gratitude for your rapid response. However, I must inform you that the situation has deteriorated since our original message. The Void Swarm advance elements entered our outer system 6 hours ago." Chin studied the alien leader's expression, noting the barely controlled panic behind his diplomatic facade. "Understood, Counselor. What's the tactical situation?" Zethvar gestured to someone off-screen, and the hologram expanded to show their strategic display. The image that appeared made even the hardened human officers grimace. Dozens of organic ships, each one larger than a human dreadnought, were moving through the outer system like a spreading infection. Smaller craft swarmed around them in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The swarm scout elements are probing our defensive perimeter, Zethvar continued. Our analysts estimate the main force will arrive within 18 hours. Intelligence suggests they number in the thousands of vessels, supported by bioorganisms we don't have classifications for. Morrison leaned forward, studying the enemy formations with professional interest. Counselor, I need to understand something. What exactly are we fighting here? My briefing materials were somewhat lacking in specifics. The Caltharian leader's expression grew even more grim. The Void Swarm is unlike any enemy our civilization has encountered. They appear to be biomechanical entities that consume organic matter and convert it into more of themselves. They show no interest in communication, negotiation, or territorial compromise. They simply arrive, consume everything living, and move on to the next target. How do they fight? Morrison asked, his tone suggesting professional curiosity rather than concern. They utilize living ships that can regenerate from damage, bioplasma weapons that dissolve matter at the molecular level, and ground forces that adapt to whatever resistance they encounter. Their soldiers appear to be purpose-bred organisms designed for specific combat roles. Morrison and Rodriguez exchange a look that would have been meaningless to alien observers, but spoke volumes to anyone familiar with human military psychology. It was the expression of predators who had just been told their prey was particularly dangerous. Admiral, Morrison said without taking his eyes off the tactical display, request permission to begin immediate deployment preparations. Chen nodded. Granted. Colonel, what's your initial assessment? Morrison studied the swarm formations for another moment before responding. Ma'am, they're operating under the assumption that their opponents will fight a defensive war focused on preserving resources and minimizing casualties. Standard galactic military doctrine from what we've observed. And that's a problem for them because Morrison's grin was the sort of expression that had given humanity its reputation as the galaxy's most effective killers. Because Marines don't fight defensive wars, Admiral. We fight to win, and we're not particularly concerned with minimizing enemy casualties. Admiral Chun turned back to the Caltharian counselor. Counselor Zethvar, I need you to understand something about human military doctrine. We don't just fight to defeat our enemies. We fight to completely destroy their ability to continue fighting. Are you prepared for that level of warfare? The alien leader hesitated. Admiral, I'm not sure I understand the distinction. Commander Webb stepped forward, activating a holographic display showing human military history. Sir, human warfare focuses on achieving total victory through overwhelming application of force. We don't seek to simply repel invaders. We seek to eliminate them as a threat. Permanently. The images showed scenes from human conflicts that made the Caltharian observers step back in shock. Entire armies obliterated through tactical innovations that seemed to border on the psychotic. Cities reduced to ash through coordinated bombardment campaigns. Enemy fleets torn apart by weapons systems that prioritize destruction over efficiency. This is how your species conducts warfare? Zethvar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Only when we're being polite, Morrison replied cheerfully. When we really don't like someone, we get creative. Chen decided to clarify before their new allies went into shock. Counselor, what the Colonel is trying to explain is that humanity has developed warfare tactics based on complete elimination of threats. We found that enemies who survive our initial encounters tend to become repeat problems. She activated another display, showing orbital bombardment patterns that human fleets had used in past conflicts. We don't capture enemy strongholds, we sterilize them. We don't negotiate with hostile forces, we remove their ability to continue hostilities. It's brutal, but it's effective. Zethvar stared at the displays with a mixture of horror and fascination. But surely such tactics result in enormous casualties among your own forces. Actually, no, Webb replied, bringing up casualty statistics. Human military units maintain some of the lowest loss ratios in documented galactic history. When you completely destroy enemy resistance, they can't fight back effectively. Morrison added his own perspective. The key is that we don't give enemies time to adapt or regroup. We hit them with everything we have, all at once, from directions they don't expect. By the time they understand what's happening, it's over. The Caltharian counselor absorbed this information with visible difficulty. His species had fought wars for millennia, but always according to established protocols that sought to minimize unnecessary destruction. The human approach seemed designed to maximize it. Admiral Chun, he said finally, are you confident that such tactics will be effective against the Void Swarm? Chen's expression grew cold and calculating. Counselor, the Void Swarm operates on the principle that they're the ultimate predator. They've never encountered a species that evolved specifically to kill other predators. They're about to receive an education. She turned to Morrison. Colonel, how long do you need to prepare your forces? My Marines are combat ready now, Admiral. But I'd like 6 hours to study the enemy patterns and develop specific tactical responses. The swarm might be tough, but they've never fought anyone who considers impossible odds to be a personal challenge. Admiral Chin nodded and turned back to the Caltharian leader. Counselor, we're going to need detailed intelligence on swarm capabilities, defensive positions throughout your system, and evacuation plans for civilian populations. We're also going to need your fleet to follow human tactical coordination. Of course, Admiral. Our forces will integrate with your command structure as needed. That's not what I said, Chen replied firmly. Your forces will follow human tactical doctrine completely. Our methods work because everyone involved understands their role and executes without hesitation. Half measures get people killed. C'est var lucid uncertain. Admiral, our commanders have centuries of experience in galactic warfare. Surely their expertise would be valuable. Morrison leaned into the communication pickup, his scarred face filling the alien leader's vision. Counselor, your commanders have centuries of experience losing to the Void Swarm. My Marines have experience winning fights against everything that's ever tried to kill them. Which approach would you prefer to rely on? The brutal directness of the statement left the Caltharian speechless. Admiral Chen softened the blow slightly. What the colonel means is that we need unified command authority to implement our tactical methods effectively. We're not questioning your people's courage or competence, but our doctrine requires complete coordination to achieve maximum effectiveness. I understand, Zethvar replied after a moment. Our forces will comply with human tactical direction. As the communication ended, Morrison turned to Admiral Chun with an expression of anticipation. Admiral, permission to begin briefing my unit commanders? Granted. What's your preliminary tactical assessment? Morrison's grin returned, somehow managing to be both reassuring and terrifying. Ma'am, the Void Swarm has 2 significant disadvantages. First, they've evolved to fight civilized opponents who value individual lives and seek to minimize casualties. Second, they've never encountered an enemy that actively enjoys difficult fights. And our advantages? We specialize in killing things that are bigger, stronger, and meaner than we are. Plus, my Marines have been cooped up on ships for 3 months without a proper fight. They're feeling frustrated and looking for something to take it out on. Admiral Chen nodded, understanding the psychology involved. Human soldiers were most effective when they had personal motivation to win. The prospect of defending innocent aliens against genocidal monsters would provide exactly that motivation. Colonel, I want your assessment of swarm tactical doctrine within 4 hours. If we're going to do this, we need to hit them with something they've never seen before. Already working on it, Admiral. But I can tell you right now that they're going to learn why Earth is classified as a death world. Everything that lives there had to evolve specifically to kill everything else that lives there, including us. As Morrison left to brief his Marines, Admiral Chun stared at the tactical display showing Void Swarm positions. The enemy was vast, numerous, and had never been defeated. They operated with the confidence of apex predators who had never encountered effective resistance. They were about to meet the one species in the galaxy that had evolved past the point where being an apex predator was enough. Humans had learned to kill apex predators for sport. 6 hours later, as the first Void Swarm scouts entered weapons range of the human fleet, Admiral Chun opened a system-wide communication channel. All units, this is Admiral Chun. Today we're going to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten innocent people in front of Terran Marines. Remember your training, trust your equipment, and look after each other. Let's go give these things a lesson in human warfare. The response came back from 30,000 human voices speaking in perfect unison. Aura. The Void Swarm was about to discover that they had made a fundamental tactical error. They had assumed that humans would fight like every other species they had encountered, desperately, defensively, and ultimately futilely. Instead, they were about to face an enemy that had spent its entire evolutionary history learning to win fights against impossible odds, and who consider the defense of innocent life to be worth any sacrifice. The Marines were coming, and they were very, very angry. The first wave of Void Swarm bioships hit the human defensive perimeter like a plague of living nightmares. Each vessel was the size of a small moon, its surface writhing with organic protrusions that pulsed with malevolent energy. Smaller attack forms swarmed around the capital ships in formations that defied conventional tactical analysis. They moved like schools of predatory fish, responding to threats with liquid coordination that spoke of a hive mind intelligence. Admiral Chun watched from the bridge of the Indomitable as her fleet's initial sensor sweeps revealed the true horror of what they were facing. The Void Swarm ships weren't just alive. They were actively adapting to human weapons fire in real time, growing new armor configurations and defensive systems as the battle progressed. Tactical report, she ordered, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the Combat Information Center. Admiral, initial railgun volleys achieved 17% effectiveness before the enemy adapted ablative bioarmor, Commander Webb reported, his fingers dancing across holographic control surfaces. Plasma artillery is down to 11% effectiveness. They're learning our weapons' signatures and developing counters faster than we can adjust firing patterns. On the main display, the battle unfolded in brilliant flashes of destructive light. Human ships moved in precise formations, their weapons reaching out across impossible distances to tear into the organic hulls of their enemies. But for every swarm vessel that died, 2 more seemed to take its place, and those that survived grew visibly stronger. They're not just numerous, Webb continued grimly. They're evolutionary warfare incarnate. Every ship we damage, but don't destroy, becomes harder to kill. Admiral Chun absorbed this information with a cold calculation that had made her one of Earth's most successful fleet commanders. Time until their main force arrives. 14 hours, Admiral. And at current casualty rates, we'll be down to 60% fleet strength before they get here. Colonel Morrison's voice crackled through the communication system from his position aboard the assault carrier Guadalcanal. Admiral, request permission to initiate ground assault operations. Chun frowned at the tactical display. Colonel, the enemy hasn't attempted planetary landing operations yet. What ground assault? Morrison's reply carried the sort of confidence that was either inspiring or terrifying, depending on your perspective. Ma'am, they will attempt planetary assault. It's their pattern. Hit the fleet with bioships, then land consumer organisms to strip the planet of biomass. But they're going to expect resistance from defensive positions. And instead, we're going to board their ships and kill them from the inside. Hard to adapt to threats that are already past your armor. The suggestion was so audacious that it took Admiral Chun a moment to process it fully. Colonel, are you proposing to conduct boarding actions against ships the size of small moons? Ma'am, Marines specialize in taking ground that the enemy doesn't want to give up. Doesn't matter if that ground happens to be floating in space. Admiral Chun considered the tactical implications. Human boarding tactics had proven devastatingly effective in past conflicts, but those had been against conventional ships with corridors and compartments designed for humanoid occupants. The Void Swarm vessels appeared to be solid masses of organic tissue. How do you propose to penetrate their hulls? Morrison's reply came with the sound of weapons being checked and equipment being loaded in the background. We're going to use their own adaptation against them. Swarm ships grow thicker armor when we hit them with conventional weapons, but they don't seem to recognize marine drop pods as a threat until it's too late. Master Sergeant Rodriguez added his perspective through the communication link. Admiral, we've identified what appear to be intake ports along their bioship hulls, probably feeding mechanisms or atmosphere processors. Marines are small enough to fit through them before the ships realize we're not food. Chin studied the tactical display showing swarm ship configurations. The alien vessels were indeed riddled with orifices that pulsed and contracted in organic rhythms. The idea of sending human soldiers through those openings was either brilliant or insane. Colonel, what's your assessment of survival probability for boarding actions? Morrison's laugh was harsh and confident. Ma'am, Marines don't calculate survival probability. We calculate mission completion probability. And I can guarantee you that any swarm ship my Marines get inside will stop being a problem. Admiral Chun made her decision with the same cold logic that had brought her to Fleet Command. Approved. What do you need from the fleet? Distraction fire to keep their attention focused on external threats, and fast pickup capability for extraction after we've completed internal demolition. My Marines can get inside their ships, but we'll need transportation off before they explode. Understood. How long do you need to prepare? We're loading drop pods now, Admiral. Marines will be ready to deploy in 20 minutes. As the communication ended, Commander Webb turned to Admiral Chun with an expression of concern. Admiral, I feel obligated to point out that this plan violates every known principle of fleet engagement doctrine. Chun nodded absently, still studying the tactical display. Commander, conventional doctrine has proven inadequate against this enemy. The Caltharians followed standard galactic military protocols and lost 90% of their fleet strength. Sometimes you need to try something that your enemy won't expect. But, Admiral, if the boarding actions fail, then we'll adapt and try something else, Chin interrupted. That's what humans do, Commander. We find ways to win fights that should be impossible to win. 20 minutes later, the first wave of marine drop pods launched from the assault carriers toward the nearest Void Swarm bioship. Each pod was designed to penetrate enemy hulls through brute force and deliver its cargo of heavily armed soldiers directly into hostile territory. What made them particularly effective was their complete lack of subtlety. They announced their presence by punching through whatever was in their way. Colonel Morrison rode in the lead pod, his massive frame squeezed into power armor that made him look like a walking weapons platform. Around him, 30 of the most dangerous human beings ever produced checked their equipment one final time. They carried enough firepower to level a small city and the psychological conditioning to use all of it without hesitation. Listen up, Marines, Morrison announced through the pod's communication system. Intel suggests these bioships operate like giant organisms rather than conventional vessels. That means no corridors, no control rooms, no structural weak points that follow engineering logic. Sergeant Thompson, a veteran of 3 previous alien conflicts, asked the obvious question. So how do we kill them, Colonel? Morrison's grin was visible even through his armored helmet's faceplate. Same way we kill any other living thing, Sergeant. We find something vital and destroy it completely. These things have to have some kind of central nervous system or control organ. We locate it, shoot it full of holes, and then blow up everything in the immediate vicinity. The drop pod's proximity alarms began screaming as they approached the bioship's surface. Through the tiny viewports, the Marines could see the enemy vessel's hull, a writhing mass of organic tissue that pulsed with alien life. Feeding orifices large enough to swallow a city, bus opened and closed in seemingly random patterns. 30 seconds to impact, announced the pod's automated systems. Prepare for hostile environment insertion. Morrison switched to the tactical communication channel. All units, remember your training. These things might be alien, but they still follow biological rules. Destroy their ability to think and move, and they stop being a threat. Watch each other's backs, conserve ammunition for valid targets, and remember that we've got a ride home waiting for us. The drop pod slammed into the bio ship's hull with enough force to crater metal, but the organic surface simply absorbed the impact and flowed around the penetrating craft. Within seconds, the Marines found themselves inside a living tunnel that contracted and expanded like a massive digestive tract. "Move! Move! Move!" Morrison shouted as his Marines deployed from the pod. "This thing thinks we're food, and I don't want to find out what happens if it tries to digest us." The interior of the Void Swarm ship defied every expectation of what a spacecraft should look like. Instead of metal corridors and electronic systems, the Marines found themselves moving through passages lined with organic tissue that glowed with bioluminescent patterns. The walls pulsed with alien heartbeats, and strange fluids dripped from overhead formations that might have been arteries or neural pathways. "Colonel, this is seriously messed up," reported Corporal Jackson, whose flamethrower was already primed for action. "I fought in some weird places, but this is like being inside a living nightmare." "Stay focused, Marine," Morrison replied, consulting his suit's scanner readouts. "Remember, it doesn't matter how alien it looks. If it's alive, we can kill it." The Marines advanced through the bio ship's interior with practiced efficiency, their weapons sweeping for targets while their scanners searched for anything that resembled the control center. The ship around them seemed to be reacting to their presence, with passages contracting ahead of them and new openings appearing in directions they hadn't expected. "Contact front!" shouted Sergeant Thompson as something emerged from the organic walls ahead of them. The creature that appeared was roughly humanoid, but obviously purpose-built for combat. Its arms ended in blade-like appendages that gleamed with some kind of natural poison, and its movements suggested intelligence guided by predatory instinct. The Marines opened fire without hesitation, their assault rifles sending armor-piercing rounds into the creature's center mass. The bio-armor that covered its torso sparked and cracked under the impact, but the creature continued its charge with apparent indifference to wounds that should have been fatal. "Switch to explosive rounds," Morrison ordered. "If it won't die from bullets, let's see how it handles grenades." The second volley literally tore the creature apart, spraying alien blood and tissue across the organic walls. But even as its remains dissolved into the ship's floor, more creatures were emerging from concealed openings throughout the passage. "They're adapting to our presence," reported Master Sergeant Rodriguez from his position at the rear of the formation. "The ship is generating defensive organisms specifically designed to kill us." Morrison checked his ammunition counter and smiled grimly. "Then, it's time to teach them why that's a bad idea. Marines advance by fire and movement. If this thing wants to build custom monsters to fight us, let's show it what happens when those monsters meet professionals." The battle through the bio ship's interior became a running firefight through passages that constantly shifted and changed around them. The Marines moved with coordinated precision, each soldier covering his teammates while advancing toward what their scanners identified as increasingly dense concentrations of neural activity. "Colonel, I'm reading massive bioelectrical activity dead ahead," reported Corporal Martinez, whose technical expertise made him the squad's closest thing to a scientist. "Whatever controls this ship, it's in that direction." "Outstanding," Morrison replied, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. "Marines, prepare for final assault. Remember, our job is to kill this thing so completely that its friends think twice about messing with humans." They breached the central chamber to find something that violated every human understanding of spacecraft design. The room, if it could be called a room, was filled with pulsing neural tissue that connected to organic conduits leading throughout the ship. At its center hung a brain-like organ the size of a small building, its surface covered with electrochemical patterns that obviously controlled the vessel's functions. "Target identified," Morrison announced with satisfaction. "Marines, light it up." The concentrated firepower of 30 Marine assault rifles, supplemented by grenade launchers and portable rocket systems, focused on the central organ with devastating effect. The brain thing convulsed as rounds tore through its tissue, and the ship around them began to shudder and convulse. Demolition charges set, reported Sergeant Thompson. 30 seconds to detonation. All Marines, extract to pickup point, Morrison ordered. Let's get out of here before this thing figures out how to explode with us inside it. The Marines fought their way back through passages that were now contracting violently, as the dying bioship attempted to trap them inside its collapsing body. Emergency lighting flickered through the organic walls, and alien screams echoed from directions that shouldn't have existed. They reached the extraction point just as Admiral Chen's recovery ships arrived to collect them. As the Marines transferred to the pickup vessels, massive explosions began tearing through the bioship's interior. The entire vessel convulsed like a dying animal, its hull cracking and bleeding strange fluids into space. Mission accomplished, Admiral Morrison reported as his Marines secured themselves for extraction. One Void Swarm capital ship permanently removed from the tactical equation. Admiral Chun watched as the enemy bioship broke apart in a series of spectacular explosions, its death throes visible across half the star system. Outstanding work, Colonel. What's your assessment of the boarding tactics' effectiveness? Morrison's reply carried the satisfaction of a job well done. Ma'am, these bioships might be tough from the outside, but they're vulnerable once you get past their armor. My Marines can clear one ship per hour if we have adequate transportation and ammunition resupply. As the first boarding operation concluded, similar attacks were already underway throughout the combat zone. Marine units were penetrating Void Swarm vessels across the battle space, turning the aliens' adaptive advantages against them. The bioships that had seemed invincible from the outside were revealed to be vulnerable to enemies that could reach their vital organs. High Counselor Zeth Var watched the human tactics unfold from his command ship with a mixture of awe and terror. The Marines were fighting inside living enemy vessels, treating the bioships like hostile territory to be conquered rather than spacecraft to be disabled. It was a level of tactical audacity that no other species had ever attempted. Intelligence Director, he said quietly to Silmeth, who stood beside him monitoring the battle reports. Are humans always this aggressive in their military operations? Silmeth consulted her data streams before responding. Actually, Counselor, this appears to be relatively restrained by human standards. They're focusing on mission objectives rather than total destruction of enemy forces. In their historical conflicts, human military units often continued fighting until no enemy resistance remained anywhere in the operational area. Zethvar absorbed this information with growing amazement. The human Marines were treating a battle against impossible odds as a routine military operation, and they were winning through tactics that seemed to combine calculated strategy with borderline psychotic determination. The tide of battle shifted as more Void Swarm bioships fell to Marine boarding actions. The aliens' adaptive capabilities proved useless against enemies that were already inside their defenses, and their confidence began to waver as ship after ship was destroyed from within. But even as the first wave of swarm vessels died under human assault, their sensors detected the arrival of something far more dangerous. The main Void Swarm fleet was entering the system, and their lead vessels were larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Chun studied the incoming threat assessment with professional calm. The enemy's main force numbered in the thousands of ships, each one capable of devouring planets. They were led by vessels that dwarfed even the bioships or Marines had just destroyed. All units, this is Admiral Chun, she announced across the fleet communication network. The real fight is about to begin. Remember what we're here to protect, and remember that the galaxy is watching to see what humans do when faced with impossible odds. Colonel Morrison's voice came back immediately, carrying the confidence of Marines who had just proven they could kill anything the universe sent against them. Admiral, my Marines are ready for round 2. These things want to eat innocent aliens? Let's show them what happens when they bite off more than they can chew. The final battle for the Keltharian system was about to begin, and for the first time since the Void Swarm had begun their campaign of galactic consumption, they were facing an enemy that considered overwhelming odds to be an invitation rather than a deterrent. The Marines were ready to teach the galaxy's newest nightmare what humans meant when they said, "No one fights alone." The stars themselves would bear witness to what happened when Earth's finest defenders decided that some things were worth dying to protect. And in the smoke and fire of the coming battle, the legend of Terran Marines would be written in letters of alien blood and human courage that would echo across the cosmos for 1,000 generations. The galaxy was about to learn why evolution had produced humanity on a death world, and why that education would be written in the language of superior violence applied without hesitation or mercy.